All right, welcome to Objection to the Forum. I got a great guest this week, Chris Capone. Welcome.
Thanks, Justin.
One of the cool things about the show that we've done is talked a lot about business and entrepreneurs, and we've had people that do funding for entrepreneurs. We've had people that give legal support to entrepreneurs. Had people that kind of give advice and guidance, consulting. But it kind of dawned on me that we had never had someone that's actually done it. And so I was excited that you're willing to come on to kind of talk about the on the field, like talk about what really goes on, rather than just like trying, other than the peripheral of it.
Yeah, it's let me just say it's not for everybody, but it's if you're built for it and you are passionate about business or you're passionate about creating, it's the most rewarding thing that I've ever done for sure. I'm really just excited to talk about that today.
What was the company that you were involved with?
So the company was called PlayerSpace. Actually, the idea of it started when we met.
Yeah.
We were working at CrossFit at the time. It was my job in college, and my partner TJ, he used to come into the gym, and we would talk basketball and we would talk sports and pretty much anything other than work. And one day he told me about this business idea that he had, which was, this would have been 2011. So at the time, recreational sports was still very much pen and paper in this country for youth sports, right?
Mm-hmm.
So at the time, he had this idea to take registration and payment for youth sports programs online, which in and of itself wasn't that novel of an idea, but where it was an interesting idea was the software. The concept for the software would then give a program director the ability to build rosters and game schedules electronically and then share that information out with parents and coaches, where if you've ever coached or played in youth sports as a kid, you might show up to the field one day and nobody's there, and it's like, oh, practice was canceled, didn't know.
Yeah.
So we talked about that idea quite a bit, and somewhere around 2013 we started it. Like I said, around the corner from where we are right now in a little tiny office.
And that's interesting that's what it is. I knew it had something to do with youth sports. I was thinking it was something along the lines of like Huddle or something, like with the video, like kind of putting together video packages. I didn't know exactly what it was. I knew it had something to do with youth sports. Did you and TJ go out and create write the software and the program, or did you have to bring folks in for that?
Yeah, so we did. Neither one of us can write a single line of code. TJ is the son of a high school basketball coach. His uncle coached the crosstown rival in Pittsburgh. I can't. I was a poli-sci major. We are not tech guys, but we're maybe too dumb to be told no and to be talked out of something. And we talk a lot. And so we had the idea. Or really, he had the idea. I helped him along the way. But yeah, no, we don't write code. Our original developer, our original CTO, was living in his mom's basement at the time in Atlantic City area.
How do you come across a guy like that?
Luck. No, so TJ had met him through previous business ventures, and it just worked out that way. It takes, to Jeff's credit, who is our CTO, it takes a lot of courage as a developer to, probably even more so courage on the developer side, to take a chance on a small company like that, and to forgo the comfort of the salary and benefits and things like that.
And so when you're saying CTO, you're talking about Chief Technology Officer?
Mm-hmm.
And so I guess you just brought him in, like, look, we got this idea for a platform, but we just need help putting it, making it happen, I guess.
Yeah, and I can't say enough good things about Jeff, because as someone who can't write code, we don't understand why when we ask for something, there's pushback or it can't be done. And so we definitely push Jeff to his limits. But it worked out for everybody. And honestly, we started where we started versus where we finished. I never would have guessed.
Did you release it or was there a lot of revisions once you released it into the market, or was it just kind of like a bunch of trial and error before you went at it?
Yeah, so we started it as sports program management business, right? It's where the name PlayerSpace came from. At the time, MySpace was synonymous with social network.
Yeah, this was a minute ago.
Yeah, we wanted to create we had this idea to create like a social network of recreational sports athletes that could be celebrated for the sports that they participate in and not the sports that they watch on TV, right? So not everybody was like gifted enough athlete to like, have their name in the paper or go to play college. So we wanted to. The concept was, okay, we'll give the staff the ability to manage their programs more efficiently, but then there was a big social media component built into it, so that you could upload pictures of your kids and track their statistics and do it all in an environment that you can control, as opposed to doing it on like Facebook. But over the years, we expanded that out. Our niche market was the YMCA, and we quickly learned that YMCAs do a lot more than just sports programs. So we built software systems out there for sports programs, swim lessons, summer camps, childcare programs.
And so is the client the YMCA, or is it the parents of the children that are?
It was the Y. So what we did was, and this is where a lot of tech companies, a lot of tech startups have a hard time with things like churn, customer churn, creating recurring revenue models and things like that. So we would go out and do contracts with a YMCA association, like to give you an example for scope, because I think a lot of people hear YMCAs and they think, non-competitive, small, unorganized programs. But for perspective, one of our clients, YMCA San Diego, they have about 30 locations within the San Diego area, and it's a big business. Last year they did 2019, probably about $287 million in revenue. So what we would do is we would go out and we would do a services agreement where the Y would pay us monthly licensing fees. Was the main component of it, right? So it'd be an annual amount, would get paid monthly. And that's a really good way, if you're a startup, to structure a services agreement, right? Because that way you're not worrying month to month where the money's coming from. If you get enough customers paying you monthly recurring revenue, not only does that make you feel better as a quote-unquote business owner, but it makes you a lot more attractive come time for acquisition, because they're looking for monthly recurring revenue.
So I got you've got this name that might be like a play on the old MySpace platform, but do you go get it trademarked or anything like that? Or
Yeah, we did.
Now, did you do it before you started doing business? Because that's a lot of times the business folks that I run into. It's like they're like, hey, we want to trademark this, and then like, all right, yeah, let's get it done. And then they say, and then they've been doing business for quite some time, and sometimes the results of the trademark search aren't good because they're like, well, it turns out you're infringing upon this guy that's registered out in California or wherever it might be. So kind of one of the things I hope that people use a takeaway is if you're in the infancy stages of your business, that's the time to do the trademark search. And still, I mean, it's better to have trademark protection than not. So if you've been doing business for a couple of years, give it a go. But it's good that you guys had the foresight to came up with the name, and let's clear it on the front end so that we're not you're getting ready to sell, like you're talking about, like when you're getting your numbers, you're getting your subscriptions in place, and it's like, wait a minute, we got an infringement problem.
Yeah, and frankly, like the credit to that'll go to TJ. Definitely not something that you're thinking about because you got to realize when I started with TJ, I was 23. TJ's just turned 50, so there's an age gap there.
Yeah,
we complement each other well in terms of what we bring to the table, I think, in terms of business. But he was smart to do that.
So when you get it, so I guess you get some YMCAs, and I mean, I don't think of disorganization and stuff like that. I mean, I think of that's a pretty good institutional client base. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's we got songs about it. I mean, it's that's a pretty good client to have.
Right.
Where do you take it from outside that kind of that one core client or that one core base?
Yeah. So when we started the business, the intention was this is before the process of us identifying the YMCA as an opportunity in a niche market, that wasn't the first area that we went after. So we came to market and really thought about we were just going to target like little leagues, Pop Warner football, a lot of like volunteer-driven organizations, probably the kinds of leagues that we played in as growing up.
Yeah.
Right. And the problem was the space that we were participating in got really crowded really quickly. And so we were all fighting, tech companies like PlayerSpace, we were all fighting over the same pool of clients. And frankly, it's hard to support Little League, as an example, because it's volunteer driven. So I'm dealing with a dad who works all day and then has to come home and run the league. And like, if you put that in the perspective of how do you support that person, right? How do you teach them how to use the software, train them, answer the phone calls in the middle of the night? It's really difficult. The advantage of so we pivoted. We still have clients in those arenas because it's a great business opportunity. But we had to kind of shift our focus because we were small. We couldn't really expend all that energy going after those types of organizations. We needed to go after organizations that were professionally staffed. And so the YMCA was just a really untapped, unique market for us. And we were lucky in that sense because what we ended up doing was we did integrations and partnership agreements with all of the companies that manage YMCA member management databases, which is where the registration and payment takes place if you're a member.
Gotcha.
So we did strategic exclusive integrations with those companies, kind of walled off that market, the nonprofit space, for a good 6 or 7 years. And that obviously had a lot of advantages.
What were some of the obstacles in kind of the beginning stages where, I guess you mentioned kind of one of them being if you're targeting these leagues and it's people that are just kind of doing it on their free time, they're not really worried about or thinking about that kind of stuff, about improving the software or what it might be. But once you kind of got to the point where you've got some customers, you've got people online and you're trying to grow, what was the resistance that you found?
Well, you mean for the marketplace?
Yeah.
Well, I'll say this: you're never really quite prepared for the growth that you're. For us, if you looked at what the code base looked like or what the software looked like on day one versus what it looks like today, it's really not even recognizable, and you think that you have a good handle on what it is that your consumer wants in the software world, but the request, the feature requests and the blind spots that you had going in, they never stop. So we struggled initially to keep up with the demand being, the phone never stops ringing, right? Hey, can it do this? Can it do that? Can we get it to do this? It'd be nice if you put a button here that did X. And here's where I think this is actually what I think made us successful is every time my phone would ring and somebody would have a feature request, most companies, even startups, their response to that is, sure, it's going to cost you X, because they start putting it into the perspective of what it's going to cost them to get a developer to do that. We never did that. So anytime we got a feature request or or a suggestion, we would do it, but we wouldn't charge the client for it. So that was good and bad. When you say the challenges, the good is that it would result in a product that everybody wanted and could use. So if I did a feature request for Justin in Kalamazoo, Michigan, it's going to benefit a sports director in Houston, Texas.
Well, and that was going to be my question. So if somebody's got a feature request, is this going to change the whole platform for everybody? So it's not like a customized thing for each user.
Exactly.
And then do you have issues with I like the button over on the other side. I don't like the button right there.
And so there when we say challenges like that, there are a lot of challenges. But just on the software side of it, as soon as you start doing things for clients like that, it's like, if you give a mouse a cookie, right? But in the same respect, when we would go and try to upsell that same client on a new product that we came out with, there was an established layer of trust and loyalty there that you don't see really in the tech industry. Like our churn rate, Justin, was like, or our retention rate, I should say, was like 93-94%, which is unheard of.
Yeah, that's outstanding. And one of the things I was going to ask you is, I know sometimes in the startup world or with small business, you have your big client,
Yeah.
and that can be a blessing and it can be a problem because sometimes the big client can own you. It's like the Walmart effect almost. I think is what we used to call it in business school, where they would say we're ordering more, we need to cut your prices just a little bit more, and then when you keep upgrading and keep scaling up to meet Walmart's demands, then they own you. Then you essentially just work for them, except they determine. So kind of same concept, where maybe if you have one huge company that is the lion's share of your business, then they might want the button in a place that doesn't make sense, but you're almost like, well, I guess that's what we're going with. Or sometimes you don't have to. It's kind of a what's best for the product or what's best for the business type analysis.
Yeah, we always try to take a feature request or a suggestion from a client, and some companies do like a SWOT analysis or stuff, whatever you want to call it, right? And like we weren't that technical. Basically, we would just sit down, TJ and I and Jeff, and then as the company grew, some other people's opinions were brought into the fold. But essentially, it was just like, first of all, does it make sense, right? Or like sometimes you get a request from a client, and it's like it's just a bad idea for a number of reasons they're not thinking about. But the threshold was, it doesn't make sense. Would it apply to at least 5 other customers? And then it was usually it. We would just do it. And again, I think one of the things that really helped us, at least in our industry, is there is a tendency to want to charge every time somebody asks for something, right? Yeah, we could do that. Here's the statement of work. When you're a startup and you're competing against like organizations like we used to compete against an organization called Sport Engine that NBC Universal bought for like $390 million. When you're competing against organizations like that, that's just one example, you can't afford to take that stance on things. Right?
Yeah.
So when you're a startup, if really one of the most important things is trying to create customer loyalty, because that churn rate that I mentioned, or our retention rate, that's unusually high. Most startups, I would say, their retention rate is probably around 60% is a good day, right? So we just play the long game on that, right? We're not going to make money. We're not going to try to break even by saving money on a developer's time. We're just going to give, and then in 4 or 5 years, we're going to ask. We're going to ask for something in return from the client, and then, they would pay.
You mentioned that you're never really ready for the growth, and one of the things I was kind of wondering about is I'm sure it happened many times, but were there situations where you had to make kind of a investment in the company in order to scale to get it where it needed to be, but it's kind of a scary thing because you don't know if the growth is going to continue?
Yes. So, and this is something that looking back on it, it's your perspective's a little bit different, right? Hindsight's 20/20. The fear that this is why I started the podcast, my podcast that I host, is because there are a lot of things that entrepreneurs go through, especially younger ones, that seem scary and abnormal and unique to your situation, and they're not, right? So to give you an example, like we were lucky enough to where we didn't really actually have to take a lot of outside funding, like hardly at all, which was great, but it made the process a lot more anxiety inducing maybe than it needed to be at times. Right, because there's good and bad of taking investment money. Yeah. Right, you can take money from an investor, but every time you do that, you give up control. And founders and people that think like entrepreneurs think, like that's a really scary thing. So fortunately, we didn't have to raise a lot of money, but even when we would take a little bit, I mean, it's scary. Are you taking off? Are you biting off more than you can chew? I think people raise money too quickly. That's another thing. I think people raise money way too quick. I think that most people really underestimate what they can get done with a skeleton crew.
And when you talk about raising money, are you talking about selling equity in the company? Are you talking about taking on debt for the company? Or it could be both?
It could be both. But I where I'm going with it is I think I'm thinking of it as a strategic investment. So like somebody goes out and they want to get an angel investor, or they want to go through their next round of funding. I think startups are very, very quick to do that because I think that their society has created a culture where people they trick young entrepreneurs into thinking that everything has to happen like this, right? So like if you're 2-3 years into business and you aren't, you're not profitable, right? Or you're not at a certain percentage of market share, what happens is it freaks people out and they get in their own head, and then they go out and they raise money when really they maybe didn't need to do that, right? Everyone's trying to speed up the timeline. No, there's no patience.
Well, I imagine in technology that's even more of a concern, because you're thinking like, if you're developing MySpace, you don't want to, you need to cash out before it's up. Mm-hmm. And that there's that concern that if I've developed this software and we're a couple years in and this thing hadn't taken off, there's going to be the newer softwares coming right behind it that you'd be concerned with, because it's like, I get that. I mean, there's some your more traditional business like, well, we'll just let it grow and we'll brand recognition, and we'll do things the right way and take care of people. But it seems like you do have a little bit of a shelf life with technology unless you continue to revamp and revitalize it as you go on.
That's true, to an extent. In the tech space, I think that there is there's an element of people forget what world we're living in, right? Like we're talking about the internet. Okay, yeah. We're talking about there's not a finite opportunity. Okay, so yes and no. There might be a shelf life on the particular space that you're operating in right now, or the particular product that you've developed. We were lucky enough to where the way in which we built our tech stack, we were able to really rapidly deploy other solutions as the market changed, right? As the need changed, as the demand changed. Granted, not every company is structured that way, or the tech stack can't necessarily do that, or you might lose your developer. Yeah. Right? And then what do you do? So
the fear I was kind of talking about, or that I was alluding to, was the sort of like field of dreams fear. Like, do you have the confidence to say if I build it, they'll come, or if without knowing that the return on investment's coming on the back end? It sounds like kind of what you're talking about is like, how much do I relinquish? How much control am I going to give to my creditors, or are we gonna allow input of potential investors and be beholden to them and things of that nature?
Yeah, and like I said, we luckily never had to really deal with that. But I like where you're going with it on the field of dreams concept, because that really, to me, now we're going down the path of the stuff that I really like to talk about, all right, which is like self-doubt, like self-confidence in entrepreneurs, things that keep you up at night, right? Like that's.
Well, what did you run into where you started to kind of question your decision along the way?
I don't know that it was any one particular thing. I'll just say this. I think that there is maybe with most entrepreneurs, or forget entrepreneurs, I just say most people in business in their 20s. I'm 31 now. So most of my 20s was this. And I think that there is this self-induced pressure of thinking that you're not where you need to be, right? Or you're not far along. You're not as far along as you should be, right? And it's usually not actually rooted in any one particular thing. And so when you start thinking about the challenges that come along with that, it wasn't any one particular thing for me. It was just, you're 26, 27, and when you're in a startup, you're not even if you're at the top, like even if you own it, you're not making any money. Okay, there's this false narrative out there because we have shows like Silicon Valley and people look at like the story of like an Apple or something like that, and they just assume that, you know, the like tech companies, the people that are in that world are making all this money. That's not true. And so for me, there was a lot of self-doubt in my 20s because you see a lot of it's from social media, but you see this narrative out there, and then the self-doubt starts creeping in, and you're like, why am I not where I'm supposed to be? When really you're actually setting yourself up for long-term success. But
the theme of kind of one of your episodes I was listening to is kind of who you surround yourself with, and it's important to kind of have a circle of friends or acquaintances or whatever that are out there and are doing it, and so you can kind of watch what's successful for others, and it's kind of a success begets success situation. Did you find that difficult being in kind of a smaller community when you're kind of out there on your own? And because I know that's something I ran into, like just in the legal world, and I mean Wilmington's full of lawyers. I think we're like pretty high per capita for you know, as compared to other areas in the state. But even, you know, I would go when I was in my 20s, and I was involved in a couple like young lawyer meetings. It's like, all right, this is great. I'm going to make some friends, and we're gonna, you know, we're gonna talk law, and we're gonna share experiences. And what I found is they were interested in what's going on at the bars and stuff like that. It wasn't, it wasn't like maybe like, I imagine it's different than what, you know, maybe the group of attorneys, the Young Attorneys Organization of New York is probably different than the young attorneys that I was dealing with around here. It was kind of like, well, hey, you know, I prefer Red Dogs on Wednesday. It's like, I don't know about Red Dogs. It's not, you know, it's like those are the kind of, and it was funny and it was fun. But I can imagine that's kind of what I took from you. It's like, well, who are you going to go talk to? If you're in this tech startup, you're in Wilmington. I mean, there's some people in there. There's been some successful companies come out of here, especially in the fintech arena. But I imagine it's hard to really have a support system or to have people to go to, because there's not a lot of people that were in the position you were in.
You're right, there weren't. And well, the cool thing is that I would say like the tech software scene in Wilmington in the last 5-6 years is really taking off. I mean, there's been, you know, obviously we were acquired, Untapped was acquired shortly thereafter or right before, something like that. And those guys killed it. So the scene is growing, but yeah, like I would say from like 23 to 27, 28, there was nobody really to go and talk to about these kinds of things. And frankly, it's not so much a matter of, like for me, it really wasn't a matter of trying to find somebody in my space, because what we were doing was relatively unique anyway. But just finding people in your immediate sphere of influence, right? Like when we talk about the 5 people that you spend the most amount of time with, I had a hard time just finding 5 people within like a 5-year age range of myself that just even had the same values and goals and ambition as me. Because to your point, you join like a young lawyers group or something like that, and you kind of find out very quickly what motivates people, and if you align with that. And it's cool, man. Look, if you're a young professional guy, I can only really relate to that perspective in some ways. But if you're like your 25, 26-year-old lawyer, maybe you're making a little bit of money relative to, you know, everyone else, and you want to live that lifestyle, or you're a 26-year-old kid on Wall Street and you want to live that lifestyle of, you know, we work during the day and then at night we let our hair down and we go park. That's totally cool, man. All right, like I just don't align with that, and that was a really, really big struggle for me, was trying to find people. I had to like actually go out and seek people that were, and this is uncomfortable for most people, is why they won't do it. You got to be really self-aware and honest, right? So where are your gaps? Where are your flaws? And now go find somebody that has exceeded to an extent where you want to be, and figure out a way to hang out with that person and to bring that person into your circle. Otherwise, your life's going to look like the life of the guys that you're talking about that want to go to Red Dogs on Wednesday. Like, you're going to be within about a 25% range of those people.
Yeah, and it's just kind of like, or if you're in another, I think that there's, well, in the startup world, you really don't have any coworkers sometimes, at least in the very beginning. But then sometimes you're dealing with coworkers and you're sitting around and, you know, you're thinking about your big case or your big project or the client you're trying to land, and they're talking about trying to decide if they want to split up their PTO over a couple long weekends, and it's like, well,
PTO.
yeah, it's like, I don't. It's all right. Well,
I don't even know what that means.
Yeah, so you don't. It's hard to relate to it, and then what. And it's sort of, I think it's a couple things. I think it's learning from people that have had the experience and know more than you, and secondly, it's kind of a driver when you see somebody that's taken things to another level or really succeeding. It kind of it can be motivational.
I'll tell you, so it is motivational, and for me, to really stay on that thought for a second, the problem is. And I would say I observed this more than I've actually lived it. I got a lot of friends. Most of my friends still live in New York City or Long Island because where I'm from. And, some of them are really ambitious at their core, but they let other people's opinions about that influence them, right? So it's like, for example, you and I feel like are driven by a lot of the same things. We've kind of talked about it offline and stuff, like what our goals are. And typically what I find is that when you have really, really big, ambitious, obnoxious goals, even with your friends and family, it makes them uncomfortable because what it does is it not that you're doing this, but it shines a light back on them, or they feel some sort of insecurity about that. And so instead of encouraging your friend or your family member, what they do is they try to knock you down a little bit, or maybe tell you to temper your expectations a little bit, as opposed to just encouraging that thought. Because what I find that people, too many people look at it where they equate your success with their loss, as if there's this finite supply of success somewhere, right? So every time Justin achieves something, I lose, which is insane. But that's how most people are.
Yeah. I think it's a classic thing where you share your idea and people explain to you why it won't work. They're like, no, I've already thought of this, and this is why it doesn't work. How do you know? Well, somebody told me, or half the time they hadn't even tried to put it into, but they do have a reason why they didn't do it. Mm-hmm. It may be because they were scared, or it might be because they didn't have the resources, or because they didn't invest the time in it. There's several reasons. So there's a reason they didn't do it, but I think that, they might even feel like they're helping you, like, oh, don't waste your time with that. But at the same time, it's like, if you hadn't been there and you hadn't tried, how do you know?
And it really, so you need to be very, very aware of the advice that you actually take, right? So because of what you just said, even your parents, even my parents, I love them, but you got to recognize where the advice is coming from, right? You got to put a lot of perspective into that. It's I feel like a lot of young entrepreneurs, or people that want to be entrepreneurs, one of the first things that they do is they go to their parents for advice, right? Because that's all they know. And you got to understand that no matter how cool your parent is, that's still your parent. They're hardwired to protect you. They can't help themselves. And
there might be a subconscious thing of, this is going to be my responsibility if it fails.
Yeah, and so I don't take advice from, and this might be stubborn, but I'd actually like to hear your take on this. I'll be polite, but I put zero stock into any advice that I get unless it comes from somebody that has achieved what I'm trying to achieve. I'm not going to take advice from somebody on how to make a certain amount of money if they haven't made that amount, at least that amount of money. Just to give you an easy example.
Well, I think some people say those that can't do teach.
Right.
And that's true, and it's not. I mean, so sometimes there's some people that have done it, and they've just decided to, they want to kick back and they want to share what they've learned. Yeah. I think others, it might be like your Bill Belichick that's never played a down of real competitive football. I mean, I'm sure he was maybe in high school and whatnot, but the guy just gets it. Yeah. But he can't put it into practice. It might be physical limitations. It might be whatever it is. So I wouldn't necessarily say that I won't listen to anybody unless they've done exactly what I'm trying to do, because I think there's different types of situations. But I think you do have to certainly take into account somebody's perspective. And if it's a parent and it's something like I wouldn't want to talk to my parents about a tech startup, because that's really outside of their sphere and what they've done. And it's, my mom doesn't really understand how to use her iPhone, really. I mean, you've got stuff like that going on. But if you're talking to, I mean, they've both been in management situations, and people are still people. I think, you hear like it's like every generation kind of shits on the ones after it, like, oh, Gen Z. So it, like, we used to all, I guess I'm technically a millennial, but I'm sort of in between millennial and Gen X. So it's like for a while everybody was shitting on the millennials, and now the millennials are shitting on Gen Z. And it's just kind of, and that's been going on since the beginning of time. I mean, I guess it was, just everybody thinks that the people that come after them are soft and don't get it, but to a certain extent, people are people, and they've always been driven by the same things. But it's just they're in different circumstances now than they used to be. So on things like personal interaction and management, or maybe what would, if I'm trying to get a new client or something, like, I'll talk to my folks about it, even though they might not have done it. But you got to take their, just understand where they're coming from, and it's a different deal.
I think it's hard. I actually agree with a lot what you just said. I think one of the challenges, though, is so this entrepreneurship's not new, right? I mean, like, it's not like a new concept, but it does feel like, I guess now in 2021, that, everyone, or the ability to start a business is easier than it's ever been, right? The internet makes it such that you have a world of knowledge at your fingertips. If you want to start a business, the barrier to entry is lower than it's ever been. But the problem is we still live in a society where people are encouraged to draw in between the lines, go get a bachelor's degree. Now you got to go get a master's to do anything, really. If you're a kid coming out of school and you actually want a job that pays you like a livable wage, and there's entrepreneurship in some ways is discouraged, or like the idea or the self-confidence is kind of beaten out of kids, and I don't know how to fix that or why that is. But I can tell you that if I would have listened to my teachers and guidance counselors in high school, I mean, I wouldn't have done the things that I've done.
Well, I think you've got to look at how the school judges its success. So the school's going to say, well, we place people with Fortune 500 companies, or the school's going to say, in law school, all the biggest law firms, the best law firms recruit from our school. So I think that's how they judge success, maybe more than the guy that went to our school, or doesn't have to be, whoever the graduate went out and created this great business. And I mean, that if you make it, they'll talk about it.
The irony is, if you make it, they'll expect you to make a donation.
Yeah. Then
they'll say, we always believed in him.
That's true. But I think what their main focus is, and it's the sales job, is because it's like, what can you as the university give to me? It's not, well, we'll give you the tools to start your own company, because that's going to scare people off. But it's like, we'll place you into the system where you get this diploma, and then in turn, after you get your diploma, you're going to have a great paying job, and your life will be set from that point forward. And I think that's why that's a lot of the focus is on job placement, and this is a good company, work here, and if you do this, if you take this class, this company might hire you, or things like that. I think it's kind of that's the product that's being sold.
But the way it manifests itself is you have a society full of people that are unhappy, right? Because, like, not everybody, but there are a lot of people that would be a lot happier making less money, right? But doing something that they love and that they can really truly immerse in, but they can't get themselves away from that fear of everybody wants the security blanket, they want the parachute, and unfortunately, the people that there's an irony to it. The people that a lot of I would say young men envy, or the ones that I interact with, like, everybody envies the same kind of guys. It's like, Michael Jordan, Kobe Bryant, Bezos, like, just Buffett, like, stereotypical, like, male role models in
I was just like Entourage is what I was thinking back from
yeah, exactly. Great. It's a great call. But to me, the irony is that, like, everybody, it's like that's what they idolize, but they're unwilling to either put themselves in the position, or they drastically, I think it's actually this more than anything, I think people drastically underestimate how maniacal and driven and immersed those guys are in their craft. Like, nobody appreciates the actual work. Everybody likes to celebrate the result, but I find it hard to even give the advice when I tell people like what it takes to do something in business, and they say, "Yeah, I get it." I'm like, "But you don't, because you."
Well, yeah, I think a lot of it people do view is they don't understand the work that went into it. So be it, if it's Jordan, they're like, oh, I wish I would have been born with that kind of talent. Or if it's when really there's probably thousands of people that were born with Jordan's talent, but it was the work ethic and the drive and the chip on the shoulder that guy had. I mean, it was crazy. And then somebody like Bezos, like, oh, if I'd have just thought of mailing people stuff from the store, I could have been the richest person in the world without kind of skipping the step of when Amazon was just books and nobody wanted it and they didn't make money, and but how there was a lot that happened in between the beginning and now.
Yeah, you want to talk about like self-confidence? Like, you look at Jeff Bezos. It's a great call. He's the richest man in the world. You imagine the self-doubt that guy went through. I'm talking like in I guess it would have been early '90s, like sitting in a room full of books, and Bezos had a plan, right? He was probably playing 20, 30 years out, but it takes a certain degree of self-confidence to drown out people telling you that your idea sucks.
Did you see his first job post? That's something that gets kicked around on LinkedIn every once in a while, but it was like it might have been a Craigslist ad, or it's his first job, and it was demanding as you can think of. Like I couldn't recall the exact specifications, but he had exact skill sets he wanted, and he wanted somebody that's organized but a people person, and somebody that has this skill set, and somebody willing to work like sweat equity type stuff, and it was. You're just looking at it, you're like, well, who's this guy going to hire? I mean, who's going to take that? But I mean, I think it shows that's how you get where you are, because he wasn't just going to settle and be like, well, I'm just going to go with this programmer. Like, I'm just a startup guy. I'm not going to be able to get the top talent. All the top talent's going to go to Apple and Google and whatever it may be. So I'll just have to take the scraps of what I can get. Because I think that's a trap that you can get into in small business, where you say, well, all the top employees from school, or the top candidates from school, they're going to want to go to the big firm because that's what they've been taught by their schools, and that's what they want. The security they've got huge debt they got to pay back, and they're not interested in well, if things work out at the small business, it might be better in the long run. I mean, they're worried about the bill that they're going to have to pay in the very near future. But you look at that, and but it is a thing. If you surround it goes back to who you surround yourself with. Because I think if you have a kind of, your team is weak, then you're going to be weak. It's and it's unfortunate because it's a hard situation. How do you do that? How do you build the staff or the team to get where you need to get when you're not really necessarily on the same level as the people you're competing against?
I can tell you what we did, because I mean, if you're a startup or any new business, if you just think about it from the perspective of hiring, right, and who your competitors are, so you're not going to be able to pay for what I'll quote top talent, so to speak, but that's okay. It's just, you got to be really, really, I think, confident in yourself, but also like you have to, the more clear your vision is for the company, I think the better it's going to be. And here's what I mean. Like, we knew we couldn't hire people with like, let's say, a master's degree from Duke or something like that. I wasn't going to be able to pay that guy or girl what they needed to get paid, or what they thought they needed to get paid, right? So, but what we would do is, almost everybody at PlayerSpace we hired was like around first job out of college, and one of the things that we would look for, we never said this, right? We didn't put this as a requirement, but if you didn't play college sports, there was a very, very low likelihood that we were going to hire you. Like, we looked for that in that person, because on the one hand, we were a sports company at the time. but that aside, like TJ and I both played sports, and we understood the traits that made a competitive athlete successful and what they were. To play Division I college sports, I mean, it's
a huge time commitment.
It's a time commitment, and it is, physical attributes aside, doesn't matter in our space, but like the mental aspects of what it takes, the demand that it places on you to be an athlete. We looked for certain traits, and frankly, the one or two times we did hire somebody that, like, on paper was like the kind of person that would be hired to one of our bigger competitors, didn't work out. I think that you can kind of, even though you can't afford necessarily to hire what I'll say again, top talent, if you are very clear as to what your vision is for the company and what the personality traits are that you're looking for in that person. Because I don't put a lot of stock in education. I know that's that's a taboo thing to say. I'm in a law office, but I don't look at you in that through that spectrum. I look at you actually as a business owner, as an entrepreneur, and an entrepreneur who had to get a law degree to do what he wanted to do. Right, there's a difference, right? But I'm looking for things that you don't learn at school, because I didn't have great grades. I had decent grades, but the things that have made me successful, I didn't learn in a textbook. So I look for traits.
It almost sounds like Moneyball, what you're talking about. Yeah. I mean, did you ever read that, or at least watch the movie?
It's Billy Bean. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like identify the because Oakland didn't have the money to spend to keep up with the Yankees and some of those teams. So it's like, all right, well, what's the undervalued trait? And I guess in your situation, you identified, all right, the collegiate athlete work ethic. Mm-hmm. And they're not only that, they're kind of uniquely in tune to what you're trying to do, which is software for young athletes. So they're going to be you don't, maybe somebody out of Duke that's never played a sport might not get it. I mean, they might be good at math, but is that going to translate to what you guys are trying to do?
Yeah, the beauty about sports is that, like, it teaches you a lot of things. So if you play college sports, obviously, you need to learn how to manage your time. You need to be disciplined. It teaches you how to take a loss and bounce back from that. And those people hate to lose, right? So, like, as a startup or as a young business owner, you're gonna fail. It's gonna happen. I think that some people are surprised when they fail. I don't mean you don't have to fail long term, but like you might not lose the war, but you're gonna lose some battles, and you need to be able to understand that when you lose a battle, you didn't just lose the war, and bounce back from that. And so, not everybody is wired that way. That's why we look for college athletes, because they understood all of those things, and the taste of losing really bothers them more than they get joy out of winning. And so that's what we look for. I'd rather hire somebody that frankly says they hate losing more than they enjoy winning, because that's how I am.
Yeah.
And I think that's how you have to be when you're going up against companies that have a lot more funding.
And I think that's the way you see a lot of kind of what the sports analogies are, the ones like maybe your Nick Sabans are the ones that you're cussing out a bench guy in the third quarter when you're up 40 points.
Yeah.
They're not celebrating and jumping up and down, because it's just that disdain for things not going the way that they should.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, that's why, just to pick on Saban for a second, you can translate that into any business, but people might look at that as like, this guy has no joy, or like, he doesn't enjoy the moment. No, you do enjoy the moment, but you can't rest on that. Like, even we would win a big account, and we might celebrate it for like 10 minutes. Like we would celebrate with the team. Okay, we would do something for the company if we had a big quarter or a big year or something. Don't get me wrong. But privately, we might celebrate that for 10 minutes, and then it's on to the next thing, because you can't. It's cliche to say you can't rest on your laurels, but I talk about this in one of the podcasts, which is like, what are you working for, right? Are you working for what drives you? Okay, is it because it could be recognition or it could be respect. It could really only be one of the two in a lot of ways. And people that do things, people that are motivated by recognition, which comes in a lot of ways, right? Like you want to be written up in an article, you want money, you want to win an award, whatever it is. What happens is those people, they're flash in the pan. They do things for a short period of time. They get some recognition, and then you don't hear from them. They stop doing what it is that got them to where they were, right? So they're constantly going like this. So like, Justin, if that was you, you won an award at your company. Great. Next quarter, you're like number 4 in sales for the quarter. And then the quarter after that, you jump back up to 1. And it's just this constant roller coaster. Whereas if you're motivated by respect, then what happens is you're going to commit to patterns and commit to a work ethic that you can repeat over time. And long term, you're going to win. And so it's hard to screen for that too, even in the hiring process, because it's like you want to make sure that the person that you're hiring is motivated by the right things. And it's really hard to hire salespeople that are not motivated by recognition.
That's true. I mean, sales. So one of the things that's kind of unique, or that I think it's an environment I've never worked in, except for maybe food and beverage. You can kind of compare waiting tables to it, but it's like being in a pure commission environment. I mean, that's scary. Like I've never taken that leap of faith before. Where it's just, and then what's truly scary to me about it is because it's completely out of your hands. I mean, I guess if you have the ability to persuade people to purchase the product, but ultimately if somebody else doesn't take an action, you're not getting paid. And it seems like it takes a different type of person to be comfortable with that.
It does. So I won't go as far to say, you're right, it is in somebody else's hands. Like anything else, like any other job, there's a right way to do things and a wrong way to do things, right? There's strategies and tactics and things that you can do as a salesperson that you should be doing, like any good salesperson will do. But at the end of the day, at the end, it is another person's decision. I get all that. One of the most important things that you got to screen for when you're hiring a salesperson as a startup is, like when I talk about the difference between recognition and respect, a lot of that, what's driving that is like, well, how I want to know how empathetic that person is, right? Because the best salespeople that we've ever hired and the ones that can do it for a long period of time, like actually care about the customer and the client, as opposed to looking at them as a number and a commission check, right? And so we would really try to screen that out. I wish there was a playbook for that. There isn't. So we always kind of, to protect ourselves, what we would really truly subscribe to the adage of hire slow, fire fast.
Yeah.
Like we would take our time hiring anybody. It doesn't matter if they're a customer support person. So when we started, it was basically 2.5 people. Say Jeff was in Jersey. When we sold, we were about 15. So, but it doesn't matter the position. We would take our time hiring, but then we were probably quicker than other companies to move on from somebody. And so that's worked out a lot for us. It worked for us, actually.
Were you the X man on that, or did TJ do that?
As time went on, it was Capone.
Yeah.
Take care of this.
Well, and nobody likes that.
No.
But I mean, I think that's a book, isn't it? The hire fast or fire fast, hire slow, right?
Yeah.
And I think because everybody has made a mistake at work, and it's kind of like it's tough. You don't want to feel like you're jumping the gun, and but at the same time, it's like it can be a toxic environment if you got somebody that's continually getting in the way of the mission, or making mistakes, or upsetting the clients, or sabotaging their team members. It's like how much they might be a nice person, it might not be intentional, but yeah, it's like how much of it are you going to tolerate?
Well, company culture when you're small is everything, really. Right, so because I actually think your clients can feel it. I think your clients can feel if the people that work together don't like each other.
Were you and TJ cognizant of all this, like going in on the front end, like this is our mission, this is our vision, this is the culture we're aiming for?
We were. That's not to say we didn't screw it up.
And the reason why I say that is because in business school they'll tell you, all right, you got to have a mission statement, you got to have your core values, and it's stuff like that. And I was like, no, but I mean, yeah, there's nothing wrong with any of that, and it's a good idea, and it's good to really think about it and write it down. But I know very few people that actually go through those steps in the very beginning. But it's important. I mean, I agree with you 100% about culture. I think that's, and it's kind of a innate thing that it's hard to really see from inside the business. But it's like it stands out when you're dealing. If you're at a place with a bad culture. It sticks out like a sore thumb.
Well, if you're a startup, like how can I ask employees that we're not paying enough money, frankly, to work harder or work longer or work on the weekends or work after hours? How could I, with a straight face, ask that person to do that if I'm also creating an environment of like a toxic work environment for them, right? Where like nobody likes each other, nobody gets along. Like to the best of our ability, we tried to facilitate a family atmosphere there, which I think in turn translated into why we had such a loyal customer base. So the industry that we're in the acronym is SaaS, right? SaaS, software as a service, right? That's the industry, and the key word is service. And what happens to a lot of tech companies when they get bigger? And they scale and they raise money, is they forget the service part. Like that's the industry that they're in. That's the business model that they're in. Like like the SaaS model back in the day, if you bought software, you bought the software. You took a CD-ROM, you inserted it into a computer, you downloaded it locally on your computer. It wasn't in the cloud or anything like that, and then that was your software. If you want support, here's a manual. Okay, that model changed in the 2000s when you start looking at Salesforce as an example. Like now, software as a service was a business model that we say started in like the 2000s, early 2000s. So that's great, but if you're not service oriented, which I think starts within the actual company itself, like you're missing the boat.
Well, yeah, and I guess that's you view it as you put together the product, but it's not. But you're kind of getting away from what is it that you're doing. And I think that I get what you're saying on that where people kind of get away from things and you kind of get away from the mission. So that's where sometimes I guess it can be valuable to have your goal or your founding, you have it, whatever. But I mean, I guess what you're saying is that it can be if you understand what it is you're doing, if you understand like what, the purpose, that can be kind of the foundation of what you're trying to accomplish.
That's exactly what I'm saying. And again, like to me, making sure that your team gets along and that you're creating a family-like atmosphere. You'd like to do that in any company, right? You'd like to say we have 600 employees and we're one big family here. It's not reality. But you got to figure out a reason why, especially because I want to make this clear for people that are listening that might be either about to start a business or they're early on. There's not that much money to go around, right? There just isn't. And in fact, you're probably not going to be profitable for a while. And so you got to figure out, you got to really believe in why you're doing what you're doing, because otherwise you're going to be miserable.
Yeah, that's true. Have you ever removed anybody just because you're like, this person isn't a good fit culturally, but they're doing the work, they're fine, but it's just kind of it doesn't, maybe not good for cohesion?
We've had to let people go that were top performers. But if you're a top performer and you're an asshole, I can't.
Yeah, nobody likes that. Well, I've learned a lot. There's a lot. I mean, I'm sure we could keep going for hours and hours. But so hopefully maybe you can come on another time or come on the radio show sometime. And everybody, I'd recommend your podcast, everybody, the Measure Up podcast. I've enjoyed it. I've listened to the episodes a few times, and I've enjoyed it. And I think it's a good resource for folks that might not have that resource available of somebody that's been through the things that you've been through. So I would highly recommend that everybody give that a listen. And thank you for coming on today.
I appreciate it. Thanks for having me, Justin.
Thanks, man.